Okay, so I am moving on here to section 17.3, looking at Darwin's theory of natural selection. The first two chapters have, or sorry, first two sections have kind of dealt with Darwin and his backstory, about his voyage around the world, specifically to the Galapagos Islands and all of his observations that he made. And then we looked at the second section, looking at how some ideas have shaped Darwin's, thought processes with all of his observations. And so this section is going to be kind of about putting it together. So I'm going to describe the conditions for natural selection to occur, and then kind of tie in how this evolutionary theory, now remember theory is in science is something that's backed with a lot of evidence, suggests the unity as well as the diversity of life. So I have this cute little comic strip about the Galapagos finches. It's kind of funny. Maybe by the end of the section you'll chuckle a little bit, but it says, "Mom, why does brother's beak look different than mine?" And then Mom goes, "I always worried you'd ask about this one day. It's a secret, so you can't tell anyone, but your brother's adapted." So I don't know. We'll see if you guys get the joke or not. But Darwin, okay, so he came back from his voyage, and he, put all of his information together, and he was sharing with some of his friends, and his friends thought it was a brilliant idea, and they said, "You should publish, you should publish." But Darwin remembered what people did to Lamarck, and people laughed at Lamarck. Remember, Lamarck was the guy with the giraffes and the flamingos. Why do giraffes have long necks, and flamingos long legs? And he got ridiculed. And so Darwin, just kind of started to write his book, and he just put it away for 20 years. He didn't publish it. He just put it away for 20 years. And he just decided that during this time he was just going to gather as much evidence as possible so that when he did present it, that he could not be ridiculed or, made fun of. But that it still happens. So anyways, so think back to the economist Malthus, okay, and the struggle for existence, that every population has the potential to produce more offspring than it can survive. All right, but the problem is that these members of that species or that population, they're competing for a certain amount of resources. Okay, so there's only so much food, or there's only so much water, or there's only so much area for these members to live as well as compete against each other for. And so we call this the struggle for existence. So individuals that have the upper hand or some type of advantage or something that helps them is going to allow them to, reproduce and produce more offspring that might have that trait. Okay, so just looking at this picture here, I got two types of finches, a ground finch and a warbler finch, and just notice that they're both finches, but they have different beak sizes. Sturdy, blunt-ended beak, eats hard, crunchy nuts and insects. Over here, slender, pointy beak, delicate frame, eats tiny insects from amongst the foliage. Remember, I don't know if we discussed variation, but variations are just slight differences within organisms. So like I am, tall, blonde, blue-haired, oh my gosh, sorry, tall, blonde, blue-eyed. But like a student, they could be shorter, they could have brown eyes, they could have dark hair. So those are variations. So differences among individuals are called variations, and if that trait or that variation increases an organism's ability to survive, go on to mate and reproduce in its environment, then we call it an adaptation. And adaptations can come in many forms. They can come in the form of a body part, colors, camouflage. Okay, does it blend in with its environment? It blends in with its environment, predators most likely not going to be able to find it and eat it and kill it, basically, right? We have behaviors, structures, like I guess that kind of would go into body parts, as well as physiological adaptations. So I have the American beaver here with some of the important adaptations that make it thrive in its environment. Long, sharp incisors that never stop growing so it can gnaw on trees and knock down trees and build dams. Nostrils and ears that can close while they're underwater. Beavers actually have to submerge themselves in the water to get into their dens. Okay, flaps of skin that close behind the incisors so beavers can carry sticks in water without drowning. Pretty important adaptation. And then webbed back feet to aid in swimming. Here's another example, looking at a red-necked wallaby. lots of adaptations here. So I would consider this as behavioral. I mean, wallabies keep cool in the hot Australian sun by licking their paws. This uses much less water than sweating. They have the ability to store elastic potential energy in their tendons to allow them to propel themselves forward with very, very, very little effort. These suckers are fast. They can go 30 to 40 miles per hour. Muscular tail that acts like a rudder, basically a third leg. Natural born instinct to flee at the first sign of danger. And then this one's actually really cool. This one would be considered physiological here. Mother wallabies have the ability to temporarily freeze the development of an embryo during pregnancy. That would mean, like, for example, let's just back up 3 months, because right now, I'm almost 9 months pregnant. Let's say at 6 months, I'm like super stressed out, or I really want to, focus on coaching or my job or something like that. I don't know, whatever. That means like I could freeze my embryo, like not freeze, like cool freeze, but just stop the process. So I could like do the task at hand and then resume. I mean, to me, that's just crazy. Okay, so I have a picture here of grasshoppers, and there are two types. Okay, sorry if you're colorblind, but I have green grasshoppers and yellow grasshoppers. Now, which color do you think has the higher hand or an advantage in this environment? You should be thinking the green one, because it's colored, it's camo, it kind of blends in better with its environment. And the yellow ones kind of stick out like a sore thumb. So this could happen. Okay, same species, different colorations. We do see that in animals. Okay, this example, I got permission to do this. So anyways, let's just think about our situation right now with distance learning and COVID-19 and the toilet paper situation. Let's say that I have Satch and Amelia. Okay, Satch is really, really tall and athletic, and Amelia, she's athletic, but she lacks in height. Okay, and all the toilet paper at the stores on the lower shelves are gone, but there's toilet paper on the top shelf. Well, Satch, he's going to have the advantage over Amelia. I mean, if this was like life or death situation, right? I mean, toilet paper, come on. Anyways, so just a funny example. Here's one that's, oh, never mind. It's coming up. I have another example too. So we call this the survival of the fittest. Basically, there's a connection in how the organism lives and the environment to which it does live in. And differences in their adaptations do affect fitness. Now, what I mean by fitness, I don't mean like I can run a mile in 4 minutes. No, fitness in the animal world is, can that organism survive, avoid predators, and reproduce in its environment? So if you have high fitness, that means that the adaptation, the variation that gives them some type of advantage, is well suited to their environment. They survive, they go on to reproduce, and that adaptation or that trait gets passed on to their offspring. Low fitness, on the other hand, means it's not well suited to the environment, it doesn't reproduce, or it has very few offspring. So here in this picture I have two organisms, one with a lower fitness. You can see it doesn't have as many children or progeny in the next generation. Whereas over here, high fitness produced 4 versus 2, and just look at the offspring there. So you're going to see more individuals with a higher fitness than individuals with a low fitness. So we call this basically natural selection, okay? Process by which organisms with variations that are well suited to their environment survive, and they just leave more offspring. This is strictly determined by their environment. It occurs when more individuals are born than they can survive. This variation that they have has to be heritable, which means it has to be passed on from generation to generation. It's got to be in the genes. So remember with Lamarck, his was acquired. You could get that during your lifetime and pass it on. Like me having the ability to play viola. Well, my daughter is born, so she should be able to play viola. No, that's not the case. Like, that's a trait that I had acquired. My daughter's going to acquire different traits. So it's heritable. It helps them survive and reproduce. So we have variation and adaptation going on here. And that the fitness varies among individuals. Some individuals are more successful in reproduction than others due to some type of, like I said, variation or heritable trait that they have. So here's an example that this is not true. but I'm just going to use it. So here I have some clownfish. Okay, so I have variations, and I say, okay, what's one thing that's there's a clownfish here that doesn't really belong with the other clownfish, and you're probably thinking, yeah, this guy right here, the really cool mustache. Okay, it's not a mustache. That's supposed to be a smiley face. Okay, but it comes out as an epic mustache. But we're going to say that's a smile. He's a funny clownfish. That's the variation. These two clownfish are very serious. All right, so let's just say that in this harsh world, humor is a trait that's going to lead that organism to survive. So here we have a shark and the funny clownfish, and you can kind of see that the one that was serious over here is dead. And the shark says, tell me a joke or you die. And so the clownfish tells him a joke. What did the fish say when it swam into a wall? Damn. And the shark just laughs. Ha ha, you live because you're funny. Okay, so this would be the variation, the adaptation that allows that clownfish to go on and reproduce. Obviously, those eggs are not to scale. And now we have selection. Okay, going on here. Natural selection. The environment, in this case a predator, is determining which organisms thrive or die. Okay. Here's a real life example. Okay, so back to seriousness here. Looking at moths. This study was done in Great Britain. And it's also been done across the world, but I think the most famous one is in Great Britain, where there are two moths, with two colorations. We have the melanic, which is the dark moth here, and a light colored moth. Okay. Now and I wish I should have grabbed the data from the Industrial Revolution era. Now, white moths were more prominent than dark moths, but then in the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution occurred. So we were burning fossil fuels, and the fossil soot, the coal soot, was clinging the trees, and the trees turned darker in coloration. And so then the dark moth's population actually increased, while the white moth population decreased, because these guys blended in better on the trees covered in soot, and these guys literally stood out like sore thumbs on the bark. So they were eaten by predators like birds. Now here you can kind of see in this picture that it's blended in perfectly. It's almost like camouflaged, if you will. But anyways, people have been studying the population of these moths, the coloration of it, and it does fluctuate a little bit. But now we have like clean standards a little bit, or better standards. We don't burn as much fossil fuels anymore. And you can see that the white moth population is now back on top. But during the 1800s, it was actually flipped. Okay, so my question to you is, what's the variation? What's the slight difference between these two moths? You would say, okay, their coloration. And what's the adaptation of it? And the adaptation would be, does it have the ability to blend in with its environment or not? And so, like I said, during the Industrial Revolution, the black-colored moths did blend in, while the white ones stuck out and they were eaten. But then as our air got cleaner, or even pre-Industrial Revolution, white moths blended in because it kind of looks like lichen, and there's lichen on trees, while the black moths stuck out more. So the thing I want to emphasize with natural selection is that it doesn't make an organism better. I don't think I've said in this presentation better at all. Adaptations are not perfect. They're just good enough to be passed on. Okay, right now, like a polar bear, they have very thick blubber. Their hairs are hollow for insulation. They have a few other adaptations that allow them to live in the Arctic. But right now, their environment is changing very rapidly. And so those adaptations are no longer really perfect for them anymore. Natural selection does not move in a fixed direction. Okay, if your environment changes, some traits that were beneficial, like I said with the polar bears, may no longer be beneficial anymore. And so organisms that don't adapt fast enough are the ones that struggle and could go into extinction. Looking at cheetahs with optimal leg length. Longer legs means that you can have longer strides, but that means your bones might be more fragile. So there's downsides to being better because, trying to be better, but it's not perfect. It's not perfect by any means. Beak sizes, which we're going to talk about, or you're going to see a video tomorrow, I believe, not perfect. okay, just good enough to be passed on. So with finches, beak size is very important depending on what the environment brings. During drought conditions, you don't see tiny little seeds or insects because, it's dry. You see a lot of hard seeds. And so finches that have larger beaks can actually grasp those seeds and crack them open. They have enough strength to do so, while maybe finches with narrow beaks do not, okay? And vice versa. If you all of a sudden we have a very wet year, you don't see a lot of large seeds, you see a bunch of tiny seeds, and so these large beaks are they're not coordinated. They're too bulky to like pick up the seeds and help. The bird can't really maneuver the seed in its mouth and eat it. So there are flip sides to beak sizes. All right, common ancestry. Your book talks about descent with modifications. Basically, living species are descended with changes over time and over many generations. Different sets of that could lead to adaptations that could cause a species to split. I wish I could go on to the next chapter and talk about speciation, but because of this year, I think we're just going to go to ecology. But this does happen. Species do split into two different completely species, and so it kind of develops this idea of this evolutionary tree or tree of life. Remember Darwin with his bush of life, the thing that he scribbled in his journal, and he said, "I think," and he didn't really finish his thought process. What he was trying to show was that all species, living as well as extinct, are united by their ancestors. Okay, so when I talked about the first day about evolution is not, man came from monkey. No, we just share common ancestors, and through descent with modifications, we are different from those organisms. So here's this tree of life. Every population consists of individuals that are slightly different from one another, variations that give individuals the ability to survive long enough to successfully reproduce, pass on to the next generation, and you get this nice diversity tree of life going on here. But we're all connected is what I wanted to say. There's a quote by Charles Darwin back in 1809. "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." And I think this is a great example, especially during this time right now with COVID. Humans are probably the most adaptable organisms in the world. At least most of us are. I know some of us change is really, 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 really hard. But, we can live anywhere in the world. We can, we adapt to it. We come up with ways to live in the Antarctic and so on and so forth. But, we're the ones most responsive to change. Other organisms are not. And so it's really important to think about us and then how we affect the world around us. But I do want to say I admire your guys' ability to adapt to distance learning and just kind of going with the flow. And I just hope that you guys always communicate and be advocates for yourself during this time. Anyways, so yeah, I just described conditions for natural selection and then how everything is united. Okay, we're all connected, but we are different from other organisms. All right.